Hey, how's it going? Keith Morgan here for TechTyro.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to make a Harry Potter spell effect in Adobe After Effects. So, if I just drop my footage onto our composition here, we can see we have our talented Sir Corbin Smith firing a spell at his fence. That's the face of a winner right there. And what else I have made for you is a stock element that we will be using for our spell against the fence, and you'll be able to download that for your own use. And what it is I just made it in Blender, and it's a fluid sim, but we'll be using it mainly just for distortion effects and to add some color and glow to our footage. So to get our image sequence, we can go import, file, go to our folder, and if we just click our first image in our image sequence, we'll see that it automatically grabs it as the PNG format, and then it asks us if we want to import it as footage, which we do, and by default this should all be good, so we'll just hit open. And if we look in our project panel, we should see that we have our image sequence right there. But the important thing is that you right click on it and go to interpret footage and then main, as we have to change its frame rate. By default it brings it in at 30 frames per second, but we want it to match our footage, which if we look here is 23.976 frames per second. So let's just change that here, and then we can go down and hit OK. And so if we just take a look at what our image sequence is, here we are, and we just scrub through it. You can see we have this splatter effect, and we're not going to use all of it. We're going to mask off the edges and just feather them out so we don't get all this fluid in the bottom here, unless you want to use that for something. But for our uses, we're just going to be using the main central part. So we'll just go over here to our composition, and we will drag our stock element into a new composition, just so we can see what we're doing with it. And that looks pretty fine right there. Then we'll go back to our footage composition, and we will just we'll start by renaming our stock element to spell pre-comp. And that way, if we ever need to make any changes to it, we can just go back in there, change it, add color or blur or anything before we want to add it to the main composition. And so we'll just grab our spell pre-comp and we'll drag it on top of our footage, and we'll just we'll go forward in time till he shoots his spell right around there, and we'll offset our layer in time so that it starts right around when we want the spell to hit the fence. Right around there looks good. And we'll just move it into position, and we will scale it down. So we got that. And doesn't Corbin look very proud of himself? And that's it for the tutorial. No. So next, what we will do is we have to track our splatter a little bit, just so it fits the motion of the camera. And we can do that with one of two ways. We can either go ahead and manually keyframe the position, or we can get into Adobe After Effects' tracker options. So if we go to Window and we go down to Tracker, what we can do here, if we click on our footage and go Track Motion, we get these little tracker points, and by default you just get the one. But if we go over here and we choose Rotation as well, we get two. So it can get a sense of the rotation. And we'll just choose two relatively high contrast points. And that knot on the fence looks good there. And we'll also choose, we'll say, the top of the tree over there. And if we just expand our search boxes there, the small box on the inside is the pixels it's going to be sampling. And the second box is the radius around the small box, in which it will search for those pixels. So if you're tracking and you notice that it gets detached from the tracker, just expand your search box and keep going, and hopefully it'll find it. But yeah, we'll just make those a little bit bigger for our needs, and then we will go ahead and we will track forward, and you can see it's screwed up a little bit there. So we'll just go back to where it came off, right there. So if we just zoom in, and we move it back to the knot. We can see what happens if we start tracking forward again, and it stays in place. So if we just scrub through this again, we can see, yeah, we got a pretty good track. So what I'm going to do is we're going to apply this to a null object. Now that won't render, but it'll give us a means to record the transformation data without having to apply it to our spell pre-comp. And then we can just parent multiple objects to that null object as opposed to having to keep applying the keyframe animation to each object layer that we need that tracking data for. So we'll go new, null object, and then under the tracker we can edit the target for our tracking data, and we'll choose the null and we'll hit OK. And then if we go to apply and we want the X and Y, and then you can see we get all of these keyframes starting where we started tracking for that null object. And as you can see, as we scrub through, it stays in place on the fence. So if we go ahead and take our spell pre-comp and we pick whip it to the null object, that essentially parents it to the null. So now if we scrub through, you can see that our fluid simulation sticks to the fence now. So we have that nice and tracked. Okay, so next we're going to get into some of the flashier bits. So for now we're just going to hide our null and our spell pre-comp, and we're going to work on the muzzle flash from the wand. So to do that, we will go new, solid, and we'll just choose, you know, a color that we might want. We'll say, you know, something maybe orange. And you'll see it fills the entire comp. So we'll just hide it for now, and we'll go and grab our pen tool. And just at that second where the spell is supposed to be coming out, we'll say right around there, we will draw a small flame-like object. And you know, you tweak your mask as you need just to get the shape. Don't worry about making it too perfect, you know, a little bit chaotic always looks better than too perfect. And you just want to keep in mind where your spell is going to be aimed at. So we can always just return the spell pre-comp if we are not sure exactly where we want to be aimed. So, you know, I'll just tweak that down a bit. And we're just looking for something that looks like it's going to be aimed approximately at that spot. And yeah, that looks about right. So if we go ahead and turn the eye on for our orange layer again, you can see that it's masked off to those bounds. And if we just back it up to that layer that we wanted it, or to that frame rather, that we wanted it on, we can go ahead and we can just move it into place. And then if we hit F, we bring up the feather options on our mask, and we'll just feather the mask, say about 5 or 6 pixels, and we'll change its blending mode to add, so we get that nice hot spot. And then we're going to go to our effects panel, and we're going to add a distort and turbulent displacement, and we're going to put the amount up a bit, and we're going to put the size down. And yeah, you just want it to look really, really rough. And if you want sharper edges, you can always turn up the complexity. And next we're going to duplicate this layer by hitting Control D. And you can see it got brighter as the two adds are added together, I suppose. And we're just going to tweak the mask on this one a bit to give it a little bit more, less uniformity and a little more life. So we'll just kind of shape it. Something like that. And then what we can do also is with that layer selected, we can go to the layer solid settings and maybe just change the color slightly. You know, make it a little more yellow, closer to the center. And yeah, maybe a little bit more. Yeah. So we get that nice hot spot. So that looks good. And so you'll notice that our timeline shows that these two layers exist at all frames of the animation, and we only want them to start at this frame and end at only about 3 or 4 frames later. So at the first frame we want them to appear, we'll just select both of those layers, So we can hit Alt and the left whale tail bracket, and that'll set the key in point. And if we just go forward 3 or 4 frames, we can go Alt right whale tail bracket, and that'll send our end frame. And so those layers are only active for as long as these bars are. But now we have to go ahead and do a little bit of animation. So with both those layers selected, we'll hit M to bring up their mask path options. And what this will let us do is keyframe the shape of each mask. So we'll hit the stopwatch on both of them to enable keyframing. And we'll move forward a few frames. And I'll shut off the top layer for now, just so we can work with one. And you just move it forward a bit. And might need to grab the pen tool if you are having issues selecting your mask. And just make it look like it's moved in space. Yeah. And likewise, after we get that one done, we will go ahead and turn on our second mask. And we will go ahead and edit that one now. And this one's quite large, so we'll just scale it down. Okay. And what we'll do also is we will hit T on both of the layers, and that'll bring up our opacity options. And we'll just go forward to the front of the animation, or rather the front of their duration, and we'll set a keyframe, and we'll go forward to the end, and we'll just set their opacity to 0, so that way they just fade out as they approach the fence. So far we have that, and I'll just RAM preview it for you. Quite nice. Now we can go ahead and play around with this, but we'll do that later after we get a few more things set up. So I'll just save for now. And now we're going to tackle the spell itself hitting the fence. So I'm just going to hide our 2 layers up here. And we're going to select our spell pre-comp. And we're going to duplicate it. And we're going to hide the top one. And what we're going to do with this next one, or with the first one rather, is we're going to use it as a mask for a displacement map that will distort the video behind it, so essentially making it look like there's a dense material or plasma in front of the fence, therefore distorting the light. So we'll go ahead and add an adjustment layer above our spell plate. So after we've duplicated our spell pre-comp layer, we will go ahead and hide the top one, and then we will go ahead and duplicate the null for one with Control D, and we'll move the one null below our first spell pre-comp, and we'll take our second spell pre-comp and we'll just repick the new null with it. And because it's just a duplicated version of that null, it still has the same transformation data, as you can see if we go down here. But we're going to pre-compose the spell pre-comp layer because we have resized it within this comp, and the filter we're going to be using does not take into effect local adjustments within this composition. So what we have to do is pre-compose this new spell pre-comp layer with the null object so we can track with it, and then we can use it properly in its place. So with the new null and the first spell pre-comp layer selected, we will right-click on them and go pre-compose, move all attributes, hit OK, and we get a new composition there. And if we just hit return on it, we can rename it. We'll say displacement map. And then if we add a new adjustment layer between our displacement map and our spell plate, we can go ahead and add a displacement map modifier to our adjustment layer. And if we change our displacement values both to luminance, and then we select our displacement map layer as our factor, and we hide that adjustment layer, you can see that we have some distortion where that layer was. And if we just crank up those values, you can see a lot more how that's going to be distorted. And if that's not enough blur or if that's not enough distortion for you, we can always go into our displacement map modifier or displacement map precomp, and on the spell precomp layer, we can add a blur effect, and we'll just choose fast blur and repeat edge pixels, and we'll just blur it by a factor of 5 pixels, and maybe 10. Yeah, 30 looks good. That just gets rid of all the rigid details, but leaves the nice fuzzy ones. And then if we go back to our main composition, you'll see that those refractions and displacements are a lot less harsh. And we could play around with this a little bit more. But that will displace exactly where that layer is. So if we just scrub through this, you'll see that it displaces where the fluid would be. So we can leave this displacement map layer hidden for now, as it's just being referenced by the adjustment layer. And we will go up and turn back on our spells. So yeah, we can see it with the displacement, and that's starting to look pretty good. And so now what we're going to do for our last step is work our spell element here so that it looks more like a spell hitting the fence. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a fast blur, just to get rid of some of those harsher details. And we can repeat the edge pixels if we want, and we'll just blur it out a little bit, maybe 7 pixels. And then we will go ahead and add a color correction, curves, and we're going to bump up the whites, and we're going to go to the red channel, and we're going to boost it to give it some red, and then to make it more orange, we just boost the greens as well. And the whites might be a little hot now, so we'll just drop those a bit. And we'll change our blending mode to add. And you can see that really blew it out, so we can drop our RGB curve again as much as we need. There we go. We could blur it a little more if we wanted, say 10 pixels. And then if we just play that back quick, yeah, pretty fancy. But now we have to have a little bit more to integrate it into the scene, and one of the things that'll do that is localized glow on the fence, and potentially Corwin's hand as well. So this is another feature that the null object is good for. We have multiple objects, or multiple layers rather, that need to be pinned to the same part of the scene, and so we can just reuse that same null object as our tracking data to keep them all in the same area. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new solid, and we're going to make it, a warm orange, nothing too harsh, and we'll hit OK, and we'll just hide it for now. And we're going to do our key in values again on this one, so by using Alt left whale tail on the first layer they appear, and then scrub forward a bit, and that looks good. We'll just fade it out at that point. So then we do Alt right whale tail bracket. So that layer, if we turn it back on, is only visible for that duration. So if we hide it quick, we can go ahead and draw a mask. We'll go forward a little bit to the hottest part of the explosion, and we'll just draw, a shape right around there. And if we turn that layer back on, we can see it. And we'll just put it right above the adjustment layer. Sorry, we'll put it below the adjustment layer that makes the distortion. That way the glow is also distorted on the fence. So if we go ahead and hit F, we can feather that mask out. And if we change its blending mode to add, and we drop its opacity a little bit, we can get a not as harsh of an effect, but it still is strong enough that we still get what we want. And then we'll hit MM to get all of our mask options, and we're going to keyframe the mask path. And so we'll just go back in time a little bit, and we'll take our mask, and if we just double click on it, we can get the transformation for our mask points, and we'll just scale that in a bit. We want a little bit of sheen highlight on the fence, at that point, as it's getting aimed at. But you don't want too much, right? So we'll just scrub forward a bit. And, you know, as it spreads out, we can take it again and we can expand it. Just make it a bit bigger. But what we'll want to do is also keyframe the transparency. So as it gets larger, it also gets dimmer. So we'll just go to the hotspot again. And right around there, that looks good. We'll click our stopwatch for our opacity. And we'll go forward. And we'll drop our opacity to 0. And we might as well just put that keyframe right at the end. And we get that effect now. And actually that seems to be lasting too long, so if we just drop that again right in the middle here, it'll have a, if we go to the graph editor here, you can see that we get this nice shape. And if we really wanted to, we could right click on that keyframe, go to keyframe assistant and choose easy ease. And then if we go back to our graph editor, we can just tweak this curve value so we get a nice curve. And that way it'll just fade out a little more gently. Really subtle. We probably don't even need to do it, but we're gonna. And so you'll notice that our asset has these edges where the fluid simulation interacts with the borders of our domain cube we simulated it in. So we don't want those in our scene. But this is the beauty of having pre-comps is we don't really want to go back and mask out every single layer. So what we can do is we can just go back to our very first pre-comp. And with this selected, we can go to our rectangle tool. And if we just click down on it, we can get our ellipse tool. And if we double click on our ellipse tool, it automatically draws a perfect circle around the composition. And then what we can do is go to the feather options, jack up our feather. And if we just bring down all our mask options, we can bring the expansion in a bit. And that way you won't ever really see the edges. So if we just scrub through that, you see, you know, we never really see the edges. And if you wanted to, you could bring the expansion in even more so you don't get the drops falling off the walls. But you still get like that nice hot spot. And if you wanted to, you could also go to the mask path options. And if you don't see your path, just hit this button down here, which toggles the mask and shape paths. And we could take the pen tool, and we could always just add a little more visibility up here, so we can see more of what explodes upwards. You know, like these sorts of things we want to see a little bit more of. So we'll just expand our mask up to those points. But we'll just scrub through and make sure we're not seeing anything else we don't want to see. And that looks pretty good. So we'll go back to our main composition. And if we look now, we'll see that that gets masked off. And it's all updated. And one last thing we have to do is parent our orange layer, our orange glow layer, to our null object. So we'll go to the first frame that it is visible, and we'll take our pick whip here, and we will select our null object. And likewise, if you just wanted to manually parent it, you could just select it from this drop-down menu here. So if we just look again, pretty fancy. And Corwin's pretty proud of himself. Now you could also take this one step further and add some glow effects to his face right there, into his hand. But because Corwin is moving independently of the camera, you would have to manually keyframe those. But because it's only for a few frames, you know, it wouldn't take that long. And also, if you wanted to make this a little more realistic, you could have some sort of debris come off, or you could have another image overlay. And in fact, let's just show you that quick. So with our spell plate, we can just hit Control D to duplicate it. And we'll zoom in here, and we'll just grab some of this wood texture, and we'll just mask out this part right here, and we'll make it a little jaggedy. Okay, so if we just look, if we just solo that layer, we'll see that's all we got. And we don't want the video to move within that small selection, otherwise that'll be offset and it will just ruin the effect. So what we can do is right click on the layer, go to time and freeze frame, and that will put a time remap keyframe right at that point. And if we just scrub through the animation, you see that that video no longer moves. It's only stuck at that point in time, so which is what we want. So we'll just go ahead and skip approximately to where we want the spell to hit the wall, which looks about right there. And we'll hit Alt and left whale tail to make the key in point. And we'll just move it to, oops, we'll move it to that part on the fence. And you know, if you want, you could go ahead and feather the mask by about 1 pixel or so. And what you want to do after that is just parent it to the null object so that it will move afterwards. But as you see, after his spell hits, it sticks on the fence pretty well. And you could also animate its mask over time to grow a little bit. So we'll just go 2 frames in. We'll put a keyframe for our mask path, and then we'll just jump back 2 frames. And we'll just shrink the mask a bit so it looks like it's gotten it's chipping away more paint as it goes. I'm just going to solo that layer so I can get a good look at it. And so we just want a couple of these frames, and we'll just move them in a bit just to give us a little smaller patch where it has been blown out. If we unsolo the layer, we can see now that if we just scrub through, it grows with time, and so that's about what we want. And you know, you could always color correct it so that it doesn't look, you know, as worn out as that does, as it's, you know, it's just got freshly exposed, so it'd probably be a little bit lighter. Let's move that into place a little bit better. So we'll just skip forward in time to where we can see it. And we'll go ahead on that layer and add a curves adjustment, and we'll just lighten it up a bit. And we might add a, we'll right click on the layer and we'll add a layer style of a bevel emboss. And if we just come down here, we can see our options. And now we want the bevel to be down into the wood, but 5 is too big of a size. We'll try 0.1, sorry, rather 0.5. And you know, we just get a little bit there. And we can lower the opacity on both the highlight color and the low light color, or rather the shadow color, just so that doesn't look so indented. And so it kind of looks like it's being cut into the wood where the paint would have flecked off. And yeah, you know, play with the depth settings if you want a little less. Maybe we'll bring that up again, and we'll just drop our depth. Yeah, something like that. So if we go ahead and RAM preview again, quite nice. So, you know, there's a few parts in here where the track gets a little loose. You can see the patch moving around a little bit, but you know, if you tweak it and you pick some better tracking points, you know, it'll stay quite solid in place. And you know, some of that even could just be from the displacement map we have, so you know, just play around with it. But we really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and you learned a lot from it. This is a very versatile effect. You know, you could use it for bullets. You know, just this muzzle flash on the wand you could use for guns. And we'll make this spell hit available for you on the site. But for now, that is it. So we really hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learned a lot. For Tech Tyro, this is Keith Morgan, signing